Have you ever felt like the world was against you? That the very people who were supposed to protect you were the source of your pain? If you have, you know what it's like to live in the shadows. This story is for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, and powerless. But more than that, it's about taking that power back. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the stories of justice we share here. My stepmother spent years perfecting my misery, crafting each humiliation with an artist's touch. She thought she'd broken me, but she was only forging a weapon. She never saw that the quiet, broken child she created would one day return. Not for a fight, but for a meticulously planned psychological dismantling. This is the story of how I used the scars she gave me to orchestrate a downfall so complete she'd have nothing left but the echo of her own cruelty. My life changed the day my father remarried. I was 8, a quiet kid still reeling from losing my mom a year earlier. Then came Eleanor. At first, she was all smiles and sunshine, a whirlwind of sweet perfumes and brightly colored dresses. She brought with her a sense of newness, a promise of a whole family again. My father, lost in his grief and totally captivated by her charm, saw her as a second chance. I saw an intruder. Turns out, my gut feeling was spot on. The shift was subtle. It started with little things, comments disguised as helpful advice. "Your hair is so unruly, Liam. Let's try to tame it." Or, "You're a bit clumsy, aren't you? We'll have to work on that." They were seeds of doubt, planted so skillfully that my dad didn't even notice. To him, she was just being a concerned parent. But I felt the sting behind her words, the slight curl of her lip that gave her away. Soon, the subtlety was gone, replaced by a more open kind of psychological warfare. Eleanor was a master of emotional abuse, a puppeteer who loved pulling my strings. She was an expert at what psychologists call gaslighting, making me question my own reality. If I told my father she'd said something cruel, she would deny it with such wide-eyed innocence that I'd be the one who ended up apologizing. "Oh, honey, I would never say that," she'd coo, stroking my father's arm. "Liam must have misunderstood. He has such an imagination." I learned pretty quickly that my reality was whatever Eleanor said it was. The abuse was rarely physical, which in a way made it worse. Emotional abuse is insidious. It's a poison that seeps into your soul without leaving a mark. Research shows the long-term effects can be just as damaging, if not more so, than physical abuse. It's a quiet destruction that happens behind closed doors, and Eleanor specialized in it. She'd give me this silent treatment for days for some tiny thing I'd supposedly done, making me feel like a ghost in my own house. I tried to talk to her, to apologize for whatever it was, but she'd look right through me, her face a mask of cold indifference. The isolation was suffocating. It taught me that my existence was conditional on her approval. She had a real talent for public humiliation, always disguised as a joke. At family gatherings, she'd tell funny stories about my failures. "Oh, you should have seen Liam trying to mow the lawn. It looked like a blindfolded monkey had to go at it." The room would erupt in laughter, and my face would burn with shame. My dad would laugh along, totally oblivious. He saw it as gentle ribbing, a normal part of family life. He didn't see the tears I fought back or the knot of anxiety in my stomach every time she opened her mouth. Her methods were creative. She'd accidentally shrink my favorite sweater and then blame me for not knowing how to do laundry. She'd forget to pack me a lunch for school, leaving me hungry and embarrassed. And she played the victim perfectly. If I ever got upset, she'd twist it to make me seem like the ungrateful, unreasonable one. "After everything I do for you, this is the thanks I get," she'd say, her voice trembling with fake emotion. My father, a man who hated conflict, always took her side, telling me to apologize and be nicer to Eleanor. This constant turmoil messed me up. I became a nervous, withdrawn kid, plagued by anxiety and a deep feeling of worthlessness. My grades dropped, I lost friends, and I just retreated into books. It was the only escape from the judgment. I learned to be invisible, to make myself as small as possible. The world inside my head was a storm of self-doubt and fear, always on edge, just waiting for the next blow. This is a common outcome for kids in these situations. They often develop anxiety, depression, and attachment issues. You've probably heard of the Cinderella effect, the theory that step-parents have a higher incidence of child abuse. It's controversial, and of course, not all step-parents are abusive, but my life was a textbook example of that grim fairy tale. Eleanor had no biological link to me, and she made sure I knew it. I wasn't her son. I was an obstacle, a remnant of her husband's old life that she had to tolerate. One of her favorite moves was comparing me to her perfect nephew. "Did you hear? Jason won the regional science fair," she'd announce at dinner, shooting a look at me. "He's so driven. Some kids just have that inner spark, you know." The message was clear. I didn't. It was just another reminder of how inadequate I was. Another brick in the wall of self-loathing she was building around me. But the loneliness was the worst part. My father, blinded by his love for her and his desperate need for a peaceful home, was an accomplice to her abuse. Maybe he didn't see it, or maybe he chose not to. Facing it would have meant admitting his perfect new life was built on cruelty, and he wasn't strong enough for that. So I was alone, a prisoner in my own home, tormented by the woman who was supposed to be my mother. The scars she was inflicting were deep and invisible, and I knew, even then, that I would carry them for a very long time. The years passed in a blur of managed misery. I navigated my teens like a minefield, learning Eleanor's triggers, mastering the art of being invisible, and just counting the days until I could escape to college. My relationship with my father had eroded. He saw a sullen, difficult teenager. I saw a man who had failed to protect his son. The gap between us felt like an ocean. The final straw, the thing that cemented my resolve for a future reckoning, happened in my senior year of high school. It wasn't one big, dramatic event, but a slow, calculated act of cruelty. I was a decent artist. It was my only escape, the one thing I was good at. My art teacher, Mr. Harrison, saw something in me and pushed me to apply for a prestigious scholarship to a top art school. It was a full ride, my golden ticket out of that house. Putting the portfolio together took over my life. For months, I poured every spare moment into my art. My bedroom floor was covered in charcoal dust, paint, and clay. It was the first time in years I felt a flicker of hope. This portfolio wasn't just art. It was my declaration of independence. Eleanor, naturally, was dismissive. "Art school," she'd scoff. "What a waste of time. You'll be a starving artist." She'd make a big show of holding her breath when she walked past my room, complaining about the fumes. But I was too focused to let her get to me. The application deadline was on a Monday. I spent all weekend putting the final touches on my portfolio, photographing each piece, writing descriptions, and assembling it all. On Sunday night, I left it on my desk, ready to mail. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of accomplishment I'd never known. The next morning, I woke up to a strange, acrid smell. I walked into the living room and found Eleanor standing by the fireplace, a smug look on her face. The smell was stronger there. And then I saw it. In the dying embers were the charred remains of my portfolio. My paintings, my drawings, my future. All of it, just a pile of ash. I just stood there, speechless. The air left my lungs. I looked at her, my eyes begging for an explanation, for this to be some sick joke. "Oh, that old thing?" she said, faking innocence. "I was cleaning up and found that pile of clutter on your desk. It looked like trash, so I used it to get the fire going. It's chilly this morning, don't you think? The casualness of her cruelty was breathtaking. She hadn't just destroyed my art, she had torched my hope. She had looked at months of my passion and decided it was garbage, good only for kindling. It was the deliberateness that broke me. She knew what that portfolio meant. She knew it was my escape, and she had taken a match to it. I finally found my voice. It came out as a strangled whisper. How could you? Her mask of innocence dropped, replaced by a look of pure triumph. You need to be more realistic, Liam, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. This art obsession is a childish fantasy. It's time you grew up. I did you a favor. I glanced at my father, who had just walked in. He looked from the fireplace to my face, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of understanding. I thought he would finally see her for who she was. I thought he would finally stand up for me. Eleanor, he started, his voice shaky. Don't you dare start with me, David. I am trying to guide your son toward a responsible future, something you seem incapable of doing. He was about to throw his life away. And just like that, the flicker in my father's eyes died. He deflated. She's right, Liam, he mumbled, not looking at me. Maybe this is for the best. That was it. That was the moment the kid who craved his father's protection died. In his place stood someone else, someone cold and calculating. The rage in my chest didn't explode. It crystallized. It became a cold, hard diamond of purpose. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked back to my room. I sat on my bed and made a promise to myself. I would leave. I would become successful. And one day, I would return. Not for a shouting match, not for a fight. I would return for a reckoning. I would dismantle her world just as deliberately as she had dismantled mine. The fire had burned away my childhood, but it had forged a new resolve. Revenge wouldn't be a single act. It would be a masterpiece. After the portfolio incident, a switch flipped. The despair didn't break me. It focused me. I realized that fighting Eleanor openly was a losing battle. My weapon wouldn't be anger. It would be intelligence, patience, and a deep understanding of the very thing she used against me: psychology. I gave up on art school. It was a painful sacrifice, but a necessary one. My new goal was much bigger. I aced my exams and got into the state university, a place I could afford without my dad's help, which I was determined to refuse. I majored in psychology and minored in business. If Eleanor was a master of manipulation, I would become a grandmaster. I would learn the mechanics of her cruelty, not as a victim, but as a scholar. College was my sanctuary and my training ground. For the first time in a decade, I was free. I threw myself into my studies with an obsessive focus. While my peers were partying, I was dissecting Freud and Jung. I was especially drawn to narcissistic personality disorder. Reading the clinical descriptions, the grandiosity, the need for admiration, the lack of empathy, the exploitation of others was like reading Eleanor's biography. Understanding why she was cruel didn't excuse it, but it did demystify her. She wasn't some all-powerful demon. She was just a predictable set of patterns, and patterns can be exploited. I worked 3 jobs to support myself. It was grueling, but every dollar I earned was a brick in the wall of my independence. I refused to ask my dad for a cent. He'd call sometimes, his voice full of hollow cheerfulness.
I kept my answers short. I knew he was sending Eleanor money for my expenses, which I was sure she just pocketed. The thought just added fuel to my fire. By junior year, I'd started a small online business. It started small, but it grew steadily. I reinvested every penny, scaling up, learning about digital marketing and supply chains. By the time I graduated, my little business was making enough for me to live on. After graduation, I moved several states away. I needed the distance. I kept building my business, which was now thriving, and I started investing. The quiet, invisible boy was becoming a quiet, financially independent man. But money was only part of the plan. The real weapon was the psychological insight I was gaining. I went on to get a master's degree in counseling psychology. I interned at a clinic working with people who had suffered from abuse. It was emotionally taxing, but it was enlightening. It helped me understand my own scars. Throughout these years, my contact with my father and Eleanor was minimal. A birthday card, a short Christmas call. On the phone, Eleanor was always syrupy sweet, asking when I was going to give up that little internet hobby and get a real job. She had no idea how successful I was. I kept my life a secret. To her, I was still the aimless boy she had broken. She was blissfully unaware that her victim was gone, replaced by a strategist. My plan for revenge wasn't a single act, but a slow, methodical unraveling. Narcissists thrive on admiration and the appearance of success. They're terrified of public humiliation. My goal was to strip away the facade she had so carefully built, to expose the bitter, insecure person underneath to the one person whose opinion she actually cared about, my father. I started calling my dad more often, keeping the conversations light, focused on him. I was planting seeds, reminding him of the man he was before Eleanor. The final piece fell into place when I heard that my father's small, independent bookstore, his lifelong passion, was failing. Eleanor was constantly pressuring him to sell it. To her, it was a dusty old money pit, an embarrassing failure. It was a part of his life that predated her, and just like me, she wanted it gone. And that's when I saw it. The perfect stage for my psychological play. I would use the bookstore, the symbol of my father's identity, as the setting for Eleanor's downfall. I had the money, I had the knowledge, and a decade's worth of cold, calculated patience. It was time to go home.
The call to my father was carefully rehearsed. I told him I was coming back for a while and wanted to help with the bookstore. "I've learned a lot about business, Dad," I said calmly. "I have some ideas." He was hesitant, but also desperate. He agreed. Walking back into that house was surreal. Same furniture, same cloying perfume. Eleanor gave me a showy hug. "Liam, look at you, still so thin. You must let me cook for you." I smiled politely. "It's good to see you too, Eleanor." The first few weeks were a delicate dance. I spent my days at the bookstore analyzing the business. It was a mess, but the foundation was good. My dad's love for books was still there, buried under years of despair. I presented him with a detailed business plan, a new inventory system, an online store, a cafe, author events. I made him an offer. I'd become a silent partner and inject a significant amount of capital to fund it all. The condition? He had to give me full operational control for 6 months. He was shocked by the money, which he had no idea I possessed. This is where the game with Eleanor really began. I knew she'd see my involvement as a threat to her control. So, in her presence, I downplayed the store's potential. "It's a long shot, Dad," I'd say with a sigh. I'm probably just throwing money away, but it's your dream." Eleanor took the bait. Her desire to see me fail was stronger than her suspicion. She actually encouraged my father to take the deal. "Let him have his little project," she told him, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's his money to waste." She thought she was maneuvering me into a public failure. She was walking right into my trap. Once the deal was signed, I got to work. I hired contractors, designers, and new staff. While the store was being renovated, I started renovating my father's spirit. We worked side by side, and I just listened to him. I saw the intelligent, passionate man who'd been suffocated by Eleanor's narcissism. Meanwhile, I began to subtly point out her manipulations to him. For example, she'd tell a friend on the phone how supportive she was. Later, she'd tell my father it was a guaranteed failure. I'd then casually say to my dad, "That's funny, I could have sworn Eleanor told Susan how excited she was about the reopening. You must have misheard her." I wasn't accusing. I was just planting seeds of doubt. The grand reopening of the Next Chapter bookstore was a massive success. I had used my marketing skills to create a huge buzz. The local news did a feature. The store was packed. My father was beaming, looking 10 years younger. He was the star of the show. Eleanor was forced to play the part of the proud wife. She moved through the crowd with a fixed smile, but I could see the cracks in her facade. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to fail. Her narrative was crumbling. The climax came a week later. I'd installed a new security system in the store, complete with audio and video. I told my dad it was for insurance. Its real purpose was for Eleanor. I arranged a partners meeting in the back office. I presented the first week's profits, which were astronomical. I knew this would set her off. As I presented the numbers, Eleanor started in. "It's just beginner's luck," she said dismissively. "This won't last. You've just created a bigger hole for your father to fall into." "Actually, Eleanor," I said calmly, "the projections show this is sustainable. The store is going to be very profitable." "Profitable?" she scoffed. "Don't be absurd. David has never been good with money. If it wasn't for me, he'd be destitute. This is a joke, just another of your childish fantasies." I looked at my dad. He was silent, staring at the floor. This was the moment. "Dad," I said softly, "remember when I was in high school? That art scholarship? The portfolio I worked on for months?" He nodded, a pained look on his face. "Eleanor told me she threw it in the fire by accident. She said it was trash. But that wasn't the truth, was it, Eleanor?" Her face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The truth," I said, my voice growing colder, "is that you burned it on purpose. You told me you were doing me a favor. You told me it was time I grew up. David, he's making this up. He's always been a liar." "Am I?" I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small, old leather-bound journal. It was my mother's. "After Mom died, you used to read to me from this, Dad. Remember? You told me it was filled with her dreams for me." I opened it. She wrote about wanting me to be an artist. She wrote, "I hope he fills the world with beauty. I hope he never lets anyone extinguish his light." Tears were streaming down my father's face. He finally looked at Eleanor, and the denial in his eyes was gone, replaced by a horrifying clarity. "But you did, didn't you, Eleanor?" I said, my voice a near whisper. "You tried to extinguish my light, just like you've been trying to extinguish his." I gestured around the office. This place, his passion, you called it a money pit. You wanted it gone. Anything that was his, that wasn't about you, you wanted to destroy. Me, his bookstore, his happiness. How dare you, after everything I've done for this family? What have you done? I pressed. You have isolated him. You have belittled him. You have systematically dismantled his self-worth for 20 years. You haven't been a wife. You've been a parasite. David, are you going to let her talk to me like this? She screamed. My father stood up, his voice shaking but firm. I think you should go, Eleanor. The shock on her face is something I'll never forget. It was the look of a puppet master who had just realized her strings were cut. She had lost control. Her primary source of supply, my father, was no longer under her spell. She stormed out, spewing threats. The reckoning was complete. I hadn't raised my voice. I had simply held up a mirror and forced her to look. Her power was built on lies, and with a few carefully chosen words, I had brought the whole thing crashing down. The silence in the office after she left was the sound of my victory. The journey from victim to victor is a long one. It takes patience, strategy, and believing in your own worth. Have you ever had to reclaim your power from a manipulative person? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could be the inspiration someone else needs to start their own journey of healing. In the months that followed, my father and Eleanor divorced. Her attempts to play the victim fell on deaf ears. My father, with his new strength, saw her for exactly what she was. She left town, humiliated and exposed. I heard later she moved in with her sister, her life a shadow of what it once was. In the quiet aftermath, my father and I began to rebuild our relationship. We worked together at the bookstore, which continued to do great. The silence between us was replaced with conversation, the distance with a new understanding. It wasn't perfect. Scars don't just vanish. But for the first time since I was a child, I had my father back. As for me, the revenge wasn't the destination, it was the journey. Dismantling Eleanor's world wasn't about causing her pain, but about reclaiming my own power. It was about proving to the small, broken boy inside me that he wasn't worthless, that his dreams were not trash, and that his light could not be extinguished. True revenge wasn't her downfall. It was my success, my peace, and my ability to finally heal. I had faced the architect of my misery and had not become a monster myself. I had used my pain as a crucible, and from it, I had forged a life of my own design. And that was a victory more satisfying than any revenge I could have ever imagined.